One of the things living pretty far from town and rurally is you always want to have backups of things and things on hand. And I don't think that's probably ever been more important than right now when we're seeing a lot of supply chain issues. And of course, there's a variety of reasons why we see that happening, but honestly, it doesn't look like it's anything that's going to resolve itself or clear up anytime soon. It might get worse, it might stay the same, but going through and making sure that you have a lot of these things on hand is really important, especially if you're a homesteader and you're relying on the things in your home and in your barnyard or in your garden to feed your family or be as a supply for your family. It's really important that you think ahead and have a lot of these things on hand or ready to go before you actually need them. Case in point, I do a lot of from scratch cooking and baking. And even though I know how to cook in a Dutch oven, using coals and cooking outside or using our wood stove, I'll be honest, when we've got power, which goes in and out quite frequently, I am going to be taking advantage of using my electric stovetop and my electric oven. But that means that I need to have a oven element if I plan on baking in the oven that works. And the reason that I share that is because a couple of years ago, I was getting ready to do a lot of baking and was actually getting ready to do a big film day. We were going to be filming some YouTube videos and was also going to be filming some videos for inside my membership, the Pioneering Today Academy, and some of our baking courses. So I had planned out to do all of this different baking for the day, which would require using the oven. And the day before we were supposed to film, so everything had been scheduled out, the element in my oven burnt out. And because we live so far away, I had to drive into town, which is about an hour away to get to like the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and that type of a thing. And when I had checked at some of our local places that were smaller and closer to us, they didn't have the oven element that I needed in stock. So I ended up driving in all the way to town in order to get an oven element. And lo and behold, none of the big box stores carried our oven element in stock either. They said that they had stopped carrying them, stocking them in the stores, been a couple years back. So this was like, I can't remember if this was last year or the year before. It's been a number of years back anyhow. So it didn't really have anything to do with supply systems that we're dealing with now at the time of this recording. So I was actually able to go to a used appliance store that works on ovens, and they had a used oven element that they sold me for relatively cheap because it was a used oven element. They didn't know how long it would last. So I was able to film and get my oven back up in action for that day. But I also, because I knew it was a used oven element, I ordered in, because that was the only option for me. No place locally was carrying my oven element. I was able to order, and I did. I ordered a backup brand new element, knowing that that used oven element may have a shorter life. Well, I tell you what, I've never been so glad I did that, because that used oven element just arced out the other day when we were baking something at a high temperature, and it arced out and died. So I had my backup element, didn't have to worry about it. As soon as the oven was cooled off, pulled that out, put the new one in, and I immediately ordered the replacement. So same thing, that when this element goes out, I've already got my backup and we won't be in any type of a hitch. And I do this a lot in a lot of areas on our homestead. Obviously the kitchen is going to be one area, but it's really important. And it's also important because, one, it gives you some peace of mind. Two, it keeps your homestead running without having hiccups, because you can just easily get things back up and going, and it doesn't cause a breakdown or a pause and rescheduling things in order to get things going back up. And it's also something that, as we move into who knows what the future holds, this type of stuff and having these backup things is really wise, because this is not money for things like a closet full of MREs that you may never eat unless it's a really, really bad situation where you would be wanting to eat a bunch of the, freeze-dried ready meals. I tend to look at our preparedness and our self-sufficiency and that type of thing as being things that we're going to use in our everyday life and I'm going to use no matter what. There's nothing wrong with being prepared and having a backup food system of freeze-dried foods that's shelf-stable that you can eat in a situation where you might not be able to get food. But honestly, I would much rather have my money be invested and my time invested into foods and into items that my family is going to be using, regardless if there's a catastrophic breakdown of society, which is what a lot of people will stock that type of food for. And so this, by just having replacement items on those things that allow my family to be self-sufficient and to function, I feel is a much better plan of action. So I actually have created, we're going to walk through these, but I have created for you guys, you can go to the blog post and grab this as a free download. I've actually printed out and created a checklist that you can go through, and for all of the different items of a homestead. We've got the kitchen, we've got the garden, your house, livestock, etc. So there's a full checklist here. I won't go through every single item here on this video, but you can go and grab these. I highly recommend that you do. And we'll also have in that post some more resources where I'll have links to further articles that may explain things and or ordering resources, that type of things, for things that you may not be able to get at local stores, with the example of my oven element. But some of the things that you really want to keep thought on and having some backup items is, especially when it comes to the ways that you preserve food for your family. So when you're thinking about your pressure canner, having a backup weighted gauge in case, I don't know that you could actually break these, they're pretty heavy duty, but they could accidentally get lost, and your pressure canner is not going to operate without your weighted gauge. So having a backup one of these is a good idea. Depending upon what kind of pressure canner model you have, if you have a model that uses the rubber gasket as part of the seal, always make sure that you have a backup one of those on hand, because they can get brittle and they age over time and you won't be able to reach a seal. They're pretty inexpensive, but if you have to wait a long time for them to get in, you're going to have a lot of produce, especially in summertime if it's from your own garden, that's going to go bad before you could necessarily get those replacement parts. Also talking about your pressure canner, the overpressure relief plug, having a backup one of those in case it gets damaged or it actually does build up too much pressure, which is extremely rare, but it can happen. I actually had one that was damaged on one of my older canners. We lived in a single wide trailer and we had mice issues, and the mice had actually gotten into the cupboard where I had my canner stored during the winter when I wasn't using it, and they had actually chewed the, it's kind of like, on that model, it was like a hard, it wasn't plastic because that would have melted, but it was kind of like a hard plastic material. You could actually see the teeth mark of the little disgusting things. And they had chewed it, and they had chewed it just enough that it allowed too much steam to come out of that overpressure relief plug just when the canner was in operation, and I couldn't actually get it up to pressure. So I had to pop that out and put a replacement in. So having those backup items, even if you don't actually blow that overpressure relief plug because of getting your canner up too hot, is really smart just for instances like that. Like I would have never have thought that a mouse would have got in there and would have actually tried to chew on the pressure relief plug on my canner, but it does happen. The wing nuts, if you've got like an All-American, which is what I have now, that doesn't have, it's a metal to seal, so I don't have to worry about that. But if one of those wing nuts were to break, or the handle or something like that, then I would want to have those replacement parts on hand so that I could get back into operation really quickly. We already talked about the oven element is a good thing. And then I use, and it's funny, my oven element burnt out, and then a week later, so did my oven. And this is true for all of your appliances. So your refrigerator, anything that uses a light, just having those backup bulbs. So this is an oven bulb. I just got, it's actually a little 2-pack. Got in here and ordered. But this is really important for me, not just so that I can look into my oven. Yes, my oven functions and I can bake and cook just fine without an oven light, but I actually use the oven light to proof or to get my sourdough or to raise certain doughs, or if I'm making yogurt, I can also use the oven with just the light on to create a really nice warm environment that works really well for a lot of ferments and or cultures. So to me, having this light is important because I use that as kind of like a little incubation area for a lot of the foods that I'm making for my family. Some other things to keep in mind when we're thinking about kind of your garages, your sheds, or your barns, especially if you are commuting or driving for work and employment, windshield wipers. for, especially if you're coming into storm season, right? We have a lot of heavy rain here in the Pacific Northwest, so having good functioning windshield wipers is really important. So backup blades, car headlight, especially if you live out rurally and it's not like you can just, get somewhere where there's a lot of street lights. If a headlight were to go out or both headlights, I'm sure the odds of that are quite low, but it could happen. That type of thing. Your lawnmower, like the different belts, filters, any type of filter that you would use in anything that's motorized and will require a filter, having an extra backup filter, extra backup belts, those types of maintenance things that you need. And also we're seeing issues. We actually have our four-wheeler that we use for a lot of farm work. We use it around the farm, packing fence posts when we don't need the tractor or the truck, moving our chicken tractors, feeding, that type of thing. We use our four-wheeler for that. Well, it broke down and it's been out of commission, waiting on parts, gaskets and seals, believe it or not, which are very easy maintenance parts. But because of supply chain issues right now, it's been 2 months that it's been at the mechanics and have been having part issues in order to get it fixed. So I think I just got the call. Actually, my phone vibrated while we were filming. I had it in hush mode. And it looks like it's going to be ready to finally pick back up. But if we had had those things on hand, then we would have been back in commission much, much faster. Also thinking about, feed for your livestock. I know that seems, pretty basic, but making sure that you have enough food for pets and your livestock. We try to operate, and part of it has just been being raised when you live so far out as we have. But also I think because my dad was a child during the Great Depression, grew up during World War II when there was different shortages on things, that you always want to make sure that you're thinking ahead and that you have that backup. So we've really tried to operate. And you can actually see a video where I interviewed him and he talks about growing up during that time period, what it was like, and we tour the house the cabin where he grew up. So you can go and check out that video. But because of that upbringing and that mindset and being raised by someone who had went through those times, I always try to have a backup item, meaning I have the open item. So like the open bag of feed that I'm using to feed the chickens, for example. And then I have another unopened bag. And as soon as we go through the open bag and I'm getting ready to use the full backup replacement, then that immediately goes on time to reorder and time to replace that. So I don't ever let anything get almost out. We always have a full backup supply of that waiting in the wings, and are just constantly replacing that as needed once we get close to going through that stock. And it has served us very, very well in times where maybe we didn't have as much funds. So we couldn't necessarily buy a backup, but then our animals weren't without it, or we weren't without something, or in the case of inclement weather, when we just weren't able to get out, or supply chain issues, we have that buffer so that we actually never run out, and has served us very, very well. Some other things in your home is, matches, lighters, things like that, having those backups. Sometimes it can be easy to run out of those, and then when you actually really, really need them, you don't have them. And yes, you can use flint, and my kids have went through that. We did, Boy Scouts and learning how to start a fire with a striker and using flint, but I'll tell you what, it is really nice to have lighters and matches on hand and to be able to use those instead of having to rely just on those others. But it's always good to have the skill set of knowing how to do some ways of those of starting fires. But that being said, for example, oil lamps. So this is one of the oil lamps that we use. We do have a generator. Again, that does require gas though, so making sure you have backup gas, but I also like to have backup lighting systems so that we don't have to use as much fuel. The more you're using the generator, when you have a generator that's going, the more pull you have on it, the faster it's going to go through its fuel. So if we don't have to have quite as many lights on or quite as many appliances on, then that's going to help conserve the fuel so that we are able to power the things in our house longer. And so I like to have the oil lamps. I feel these give off a lot more light than a candle does. So, but replacement wicks. So as you can see here, I've got my wick. This wick is pretty good, but I should have a backup replacement for this. And then also the lamp fuel, right, that goes in here that is actually burning. I want to make sure that I've got a backup of that. So you can see I've actually been using this. This one's not even really half full. I like to have this topped off so that it's always ready to go whenever the power does go out. I'm not trying to fill this if it's dark. Sometimes the power goes out when it's already dark out. I'm not trying to fill this in the dark and stumbling around, that it's always full. And then I know that if this is full, then I can tell this is my backup of the light. And this is almost a full bottle. So I need to fill this up, and then it's going to let me see what my level is here. And once I've got only half a bottle left of my oil lamp, then I know it's time for me to reorder this one, so I've got a full one in backup. So that's just kind of the method, like thinking through a lot of these things. Like a knife sharpener. Do you have a way to sharpen your knives? Making sure you've got a knife sharpener. Any type, we already went over filters. And even thinking about your home, like especially if you work from home or in your home office, which I do work from home now, so making sure I've got backup ink for the printer, I've got backup paper, backup labels for shipping products out, that type of thing. Backup power cables and chargers for phones, maybe laptops. How's your ammunition if you have firearms in your home, which please, let us not go down that rabbit hole of whether or not you think you should or not. We protect our livestock, and we hunt, and we have firearms, and yes, we do all of the safety precautions that are needed. However, making sure that you have ammunition, making sure that you have got your cleaning kits in order to keep those in operating condition and to keep them cleaned, that type of a thing. Fuses for your electrical devices, right? You blow a fuse, you want to have that backup fuse so you can get things back up running. And then when you're thinking about, prescription medications, your medicines for both your livestock, pets, and humans. We are moving more and more towards growing our own medicine and doing an herbal medicine cabinet. So you can check out, I've got quite a few videos on that you can go through and look at those. I also have a podcast episode on talking about alternative medicine and keeping that on hand. Kind of a little bit more of my story of switching from prescription medications to a more natural healthcare system. So that's a great resource to go and check out as well. And then when we're talking about our garden and our yard, we do a lot of seed saving, but I do also buy seeds. I don't seed save everything, but I have started ever since March of 2020. That seems to be a starting point of a lot of things that I've shared with you guys lately. I stock my garden seed a full year in advance. So when we plant the main summer garden in usually May is when I'm putting in my main summer garden. So like my corn and summer squash and that type of stuff, I reorder for the following year right then and there. If it's something that we're not seed saving, like our beans, we do all of our seed saving on our beans. And so you can see I've got this seed was saved just from this past year in 2021. So this will get planted in 2022. But I make sure that I have got all of my garden seed on hand that we need for the next year, 1 year in advance. And garden seed will last multiple years as long as it's stored in a cool, dry environment, out of direct sunlight, not getting too obviously wet, not getting too hot. It will store and be fine for years, actually. The longer you go, once you get past like 2 to 3 years, you'll start to see a drop off on germination rate, meaning if you plant 10 seeds, maybe only 9 of those 10 seeds sprouts. And each year you get older and older, you'll see less and less. So instead of 9 seeds sprouting, maybe it would be 8, right? That germination rate will go down. But I've had bean seed that's been 5, 6, probably even 7 years old that we have planted and had a pretty high germination rate on it. It's germinated just fine. The only exception to that with the garden seed is the really tiny, tiny seeds that tend to be a little bit more oily. Those ones, usually 1 to 2 years, and then you'll see a more drastic drop-off rate in germination. And onion seed. So onion seed, not your onion starts. Like if you order your onion bulbs and they just look like a little tiny green onion and you plant that little bulb in the ground, that's not what I'm talking about. But actual onion seeds, which are the little tiny seeds, those tend to be about a year, and then their germination rate drops off so much that most people don't even bother. So for my onion seeds, I typically will order them in and try to use them all within that same year. I don't order those like a year, 2 years, etc. out ahead, but everything else will be just fine. And as far as where I order, I use only heirloom seeds so that if I do want to seed save, of course, knowing how to seed save in different plants because of cross-pollination issues, etc., is really important so that you have that skill set. But if I start with all heirloom seeds to begin with, then if I do need to seed save from them, then I'm going to be set up in order to do that successfully. So I've got all of the different sources where we order seeds from, and more on ordering your garden seed. How many plants do you need per person if you're trying to grow a year's worth of specific foods, etc. I've got a ton of posts and worksheets and charts and whatnot for you, so you can go and grab those. We'll put the link down below in the video description so that you can grab those. But think ahead about that. If you are seed starting indoors, having an extra of your seed starting mix, your potting soil that you use. When you're seed starting indoors, I've got a ton of videos on that you can check out. Not recommended that you use your straight garden soil, because one, you'll be introducing little gnats that love to fly around in your house, but two, higher chance of dampening off disease and fungal disease when you're using that unless you're sterilizing it. So I like to just have a small bag of potting soil mix that I keep on hand to do my seed starting with, and then I don't have to sterilize the soil for my seed starts. Another thing to think about is like garden hose repair kits. Washer gaskets, just like little things like that. Even your indoor faucets, do you have backup washers if it starts to leak? The cartridges we have a kitchen faucet, and the hot water cartridge on our kitchen faucet probably about every 5 years tends to leak, and we have to replace that in order to stop the leak. So those types of things. And then for peace of mind, a lot of people, a hand crank emergency radio is a good idea. Extra, if you're doing like, have somebody who works like at a mill or does a lot of outside type, heavy type work, do you have extra work gloves? Do you have extra work boots? Those types of things, just kind of some of those backups. And if you live on a well, your own private well, maybe thinking about a backup pump. Now, some of this stuff, you might not be able to go out and go through this list and be able to get every single thing on it. Some of it you might have to budget for and save for, but just things like that, just to think about, if we are in our well and the pump goes out, how long is it going to take us to get a replacement pump? And kind of checking on that. And then how much does it cost to have a replacement pump on hand so that if it does go out, then we can just replace that and have water. So this is just meant to give you some ideas, things to think about, that are just going to help keep you operating and have some peace of mind. So again, you can go and grab this checklist, download that, go through it. There's a lot more than what we just talked about here in this video that you can go through on this list, and more resources that'll go further in depth into some of the other items. And speaking of cooking and being prepared with backup items and different things in the kitchen to keep it running smoothly, you can go and check out that video right here.